Welcome to the Coroner's Report, Episode 5, Part 1. Darla, Harper, and Pam Page, When the Cousins Went Missing. Before we begin, please remember this is a true crime podcast with adult themes. Please be aware, when possible, the actual person's voice is in this podcast. However, several witnesses are deceased and some chose not to be recorded. Please remember to like and follow us on all social media platforms and share us with your friends. All suspects or persons of interest mentioned are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. We've all been there. It's 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Everyone's at the office. The buzz around the water cooler is about the show you watched the night before, about the anticipation of Saturday's big ball game. Everything is normal, but something seems kind of out of place. You look around, and you realize the young single mother who's always punctual, always responsible, is nowhere to be found. She called in sick the day before, but so far, no word at all. You call and the phone rings. It rings with no answer. Concern builds. The boss, he decides to send you out to check on your coworker. You get to her apartment. You notice her car is missing, but you knock on the door anyway, just in case. There's no response. Just silence for a moment. Then you hear the faint sounds of a small child behind that locked door. And that's when the panic sets in. She'd never leave her child alone.
Welcome back to the Coroner's Report. This is Steve Navoychek, and I was the coroner for two of the largest counties in Arkansas and served as the State Crime Lab Director. These days, I'm retired and reviewing some of the most interesting cases of my career with my partner, Tracy Carrington. Our case today, it's actually two cases, with two victims, two states, and possibly two perpetrators, but no resolution and no bodies found. Oh, and I forgot, the victims? They were first cousins. The first woman, Darla Harper, went missing in 1986 in Arkansas, leaving behind her 2-year-old daughter. Then 3 years later, out in Arizona, Darla's first cousin, Pam Page, goes missing with her little dog, Rerun. The women were never seen again.
Like all our cases, there's many twists and turns with a long list of characters, but as a mom myself, Darla's case hit close to home because of her daughter. I can't imagine what the family went through, not only when Darla went missing, but then again when Pam disappeared, and then not knowing over the next 40 years.
March 4th, 1986, 25-year-old Darla Melissa Harper was living with her 2-year-old daughter in a bedroom community called Gravel Ridge just outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. She had left her husband the year before and was living in the Seven Oaks apartments. Gravel Ridge was fairly rural, and it was a safe place for a single mother to raise her 2.5-year-old daughter named Leslie. Before that, she lived with her husband in a house near Sherwood.
Darla worked in downtown Little Rock for the IRS in the personnel department. Darla's boss said she worked for them for 4 years and never failed to show up or call. She was extremely well liked. Her boss was also concerned because this just wasn't like Darla, and he sent another employee to check on her. Carol Kimball, a detective with the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office, worked the case.
The fact that she had worked for IRS for 4 or 5 years and never was not at work without calling to let anybody know, and she did not show up for work. So they dispatched somebody, some coworker out that next day. That day she didn't show up for work about 2:00, banging on her door. I mean, it was very unlike her not to call in and let them know she was going to be sick or out or whatever. She went by the rules.
The coworker found Kathy Jumper, Darla's neighbor. Kathy was also concerned.
I last talked to Darla around 9:30 Tuesday night. Later, at about 11:30, I heard muffled noises coming from her apartment. Sort of like someone moving furniture, but I didn't think anything about it. The next morning, I called Darla's babysitter, and the babysitter called Darla's phone at 5:30, 5:45, and 6 o'clock in the morning Wednesday, but no one answered.
At 1:30 that afternoon, Kathy and the coworker found the door locked at Darla's apartment.
Darla's little girl, Leslie, she was inside crying. We tried to get into the apartment, but couldn't. We called the landlord, and he opened the door with his key. That's when we found Darla's daughter, and we called Darla's parents, and then we called the police.
Detective Carol Kimball recalls the details of working the case.
And we got dispatched out there as a result of the fellow employee finding Leslie, the little 2-year-old, in the apartment by herself.
Detective Vince Mayer worked the case as well.
Basically, all hands on deck kind of situation as far as the detectives responding to the scene and then going out and following leads and that sort of thing.
The front door was locked, but there was no sign of Darla or her car, and Darla would have never left her toddler alone. Sergeant Carl Beadle with the Pulaski County Sheriff was the first investigator at the scene.
We met Darla's parents, Mel and Jerry Nixon, at the apartment. Darla's daughter Leslie was there in the apartment alone, but didn't appear to be frightened or harmed.
That baby being found alone in that apartment really raised the concern to another level. Detective Vince Mayer recalls how quickly the sheriff's office stepped into action.
Yeah, so obviously once they found that the baby was there alone, that was a pretty good indication that there was some type of foul play going on or something suspicious for sure.
The child was released to the grandparents. There was no evidence of a struggle in the apartment. She was last seen wearing blue jeans and a pullover shirt. She was wearing a teardrop-shaped diamond pendant, a diamond cluster ring, and a horseshoe-shaped diamond ring. She has a small scar on her right cheek and a burn scar on her left elbow.
Immediately, detectives with the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office, they jumped into action. Detective Kimball recalls.
It was so out of character for her not to be where she's supposed to be. And the fact that her entire family said she would never, never leave that child by herself.
Darla simply wasn't someone who would leave without talking to someone. That's what alarmed Detective Beadle.
It appears that the little girl, Leslie, had been left alone for about 14 hours. We're looking into the possibility that there could be foul play.
Soon, Detective Beadle announced Darla's car had been located.
We found Mrs. Harper's 1981 Honda Accord at 5 p.m. on a commuter parking lot that's about 9 miles from her apartment. There was a small amount of blood in the car in the rear behind the back seat, and the car was locked. The samples of that suspected blood have been sent to the state crime lab for testing.
Detectives Vince Mayer and Carol Kimball both were called to the location where the car was found.
And I remember going to the parking lot there at Crystal Hill where the car was located.
The car, just inside, it looked like somebody had been in the back seat and pushed the seat up to get out.
When we opened up the car, that driver's seat was all the way back, like someone large or tall had driven that car to that location and had parked it there.
Darla Harper never used that commuter parking lot. It made no sense for her car to be found there. The lot was miles away from her home and from her workplace. It was like it was just dumped. Detective Vince Mayer with the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office, he remembers those two locations, the apartment and where the car was dumped. Both became the focus of the investigation.
That was one of those homicides. There wasn't hardly any leads. The victim wasn't unsavory. I think the most important part of any type of investigation is it starts with a neighborhood canvas. We did our canvas and, we had a couple of leads to go on.
But Detectives Kimball and Mayer both believe more than one person participated in Darla's disappearance.
They needed 2 drivers, one to drive the car, the driver that went to the scene of the disappearance, and one to drive Darla's car to the commuter lot. But that could have been his girlfriend.
I always thought as well that there had to be at least one other person because, when you go into the apartment, there was no signs of a struggle.
The next day, the search continued.
3 helicopters searched today, and about 30 Internal Revenue Service office employees spent part of the day looking for their coworker, Darla. It's really strange. I'm not saying she didn't leave on her own, but it's totally out of character to do something like that, leaving her baby alone. The baby, Leslie, is staying with Miss Harper's parents in Pine Bluff. Miss Harper was in the process of getting a divorce.
The only witness to what might have happened to Darla in that apartment was her 2.5-year-old daughter. Detective Kimball was assigned to special duty.
I had Leslie. I worked out a deal with Children's Hospital, and we were taking her to Children's Hospital to work with a child psychologist. We had a 2-year-old we thought witnessed to a crime. So working with Leslie to see if there's any way that they can get any information out of this 2-year-old that might help us in this investigation. And we were making some headway. I would go and watch through glass the sessions, maybe 2 or 3, and then Barry found out about it and he stopped it.
The investigation was kicked into high gear when the crime scene investigators made a discovery, according to Detective Beadle.
We found a smear of what appears to be human blood on the front door of the apartment. Both samples from the apartment and the car are being analyzed now at the crime lab, and we should have the results soon. The bloodstains indicate foul play is a possibility.
I was stunned to read in the newspaper just how many resources were being used in an attempt to find Darla.
Helicopters from the U.S. Air Force, the Arkansas National Guard, and a TV station joined the search. About 30 IRS employees took part of the day off to search for Mrs. Harper. Horseback patrols will continue the search today.
What's that old saying, trying to find a needle in a stack of needles? That's what it was like. Darla was petite, only 5'3" and weighed about 110 pounds. She could be anywhere, but it seemed she was nowhere at all. From newspaper reports, you can tell people really cared about her.
IRS employees volunteered to take leave from their jobs to help in the search and joined 30 sheriff's deputies to scan wooded areas in the northern part of the county.
Now, Pulaski County is a big county and has the largest population in the state, but that doesn't mean that parts of it weren't still rural. The county population was 351,000, so it was an urban area with Little Rock serving as the state capital and the county seat. But northern Pulaski County is home to Camp Joseph T. Robinson, a 32,000-acre Arkansas Army National Guard installation. It's a big place. You could get lost out there. Detective Carol Kimball almost did get lost out there looking for Darla.
We did a lot of miles searching. We went over every mile of Camp Robinson. I buried up a county car to the axles by a creek bed because one of the psychic we had said she was buried by a creek with a bunch of tree limbs and da-da-da. And I've got this psychic in the car with me, right? They always designated me to do the shit stuff. I didn't even tell them where I am to come get me.
I've been lost out there. Not lost, I was a mite bewildered for a little while, but I figured it out. I'll tell you what, it's a hell of a place to hide bodies. I always used to tease friends of mine. I said, look, I know where I could hide your ass. Nobody'll ever find you.
So you're telling us never piss off the coroner.
That's right. We know all the good hidey holes.
Good to know, Steve. Good to know. The police said they were following up on any and all leads, and they were looking in remote areas where a car might have driven up and a body could have quickly been thrown out. I was surprised at how quickly the investigators began talking about how this was a possible murder. They kind of knew from the start.
Yeah, these investigators were some of the best in the business, and they knew what they were doing. Soon, investigators focused on dump sites. When they found Darla's car, it was caked with mud, and there were cedar tree branches hanging from the rear bumper. Detective Kimball recalls what was found.
But the grass and stuff was in the bumpers.
Sounds like someone knew some back roads.
Off-roading in a Honda, huh? Well, Darla's estranged husband, Barry, worked for Southwestern Bell Telephone Company, so he knew his way around the county, but claimed he didn't know what happened to her.
That's a shock. We've been separated for about a year, and we were waiting for the divorce to be complete. It's just hard to understand what happened there because it's not like her to just leave. I saw her Sunday, but I don't see her regularly or really even talk to her.
Darla's family was just shell-shocked. See, just 10 days before Darla went missing, their oldest daughter, Deborah, had choked to death. She was only 27 years old. 2 daughters, in their 20s, were gone within 2 weeks of each other.
I can't imagine the pain of losing 2 daughters, one right after the other. They had just buried one daughter when their other daughter went missing. It was more than most parents could have taken. But Darla's mother, Mel Nixon, she was a fighter.
If anything kept this case alive, it was Darla's mother, Mel Nixon. Mel told police she had spoken to Darla by phone on Monday night and that Darla had never left her daughter alone. Mel was quoted in the paper saying she had never felt this helpless in all of her life.
Mel Nixon wasn't the only one feeling helpless. Local police searched with mounted patrol officers and the television station's helicopter running back and forth over the massive Camp Robinson area. Searchers thought they saw something in the Arkansas River, but that ended up just being a buoy. They were hoping that the car would lead them to where Darla's body was located. Foul play was definitely suspected. This just wasn't normal for Darla to disappear.
The Pulaski County Sheriff, Carol Gravett, made a plea to the public asking all residents, especially those in the northern half of the county, to check fields and barns and outbuildings and any remote area for the missing woman.
Those first few days of an investigation are crucial, but when you have nothing, absolutely nothing to go on, it quickly becomes a frustrating nightmare. There were no signs of a struggle in her Gravel Ridge apartment, but a small amount of blood was found in her apartment and in her car. The police said that they were concentrating on an area near where the car was found because that was the only lead they had. Really, Darla could be anywhere.
After 2 weeks of searching, the family offered a reward of $25,000 for the apprehension, arrest, and conviction of the person or persons involved in the young mother's disappearance.
The family even reached out to local psychic Carol Pate.
I believe I know what happened to Darla Harper. That information, well, it was turned over to the sheriff's office by Miss Harper's family. I used a photograph of Darla and her car in an effort to find her. The family contacted me earlier in the week and all came to visit. I have assisted local law enforcement agencies in the past on cases, but this is the first one that's ongoing. I had a vision that Darla had been stabbed in the chest and was buried in a bauxite pit. I will continue to work on this case.
I'm a skeptic when it comes to psychics, but then again, I've never had a missing child. Detective Carol Kimball was also skeptical.
I didn't put a lot of credit into anything that Carol Pate had to interject in the case.
Detective Vince Mayer also remembers the psychic.
She would come to our office every once in a while, and I remember Major Dill, really wasn't very impressed with her abilities. I don't think she really got off to a good start with us. I think she did have a couple of cases, if you look at her history, that were apparently very accurate, but her odds were kind of low as far as any kind of solvability.
They say even a blind hog finds an acorn occasionally, or a nut.
Investigator Carl Beadle with the sheriff's office would become the lead investigator.
We have received information through the family from the psychic, and we are reviewing it. We did allow Miss Pate to look at Mrs. Harper's car.
Having a psychic around wasn't unusual at the time. The missing girl's father contacted Carol.
We called Carol Pate because I heard of her success from the TV. I just thought we'd reach for another straw, another possibility. It certainly couldn't do any harm. We're not giving up hope. We are sure hoping that she's still alive.
2 weeks later, after she went missing, her co-workers with the IRS were still searching for her.
Almost 125 people showed up to search, not only from the IRS, but residents and first responders too. Everyone was looking, hoping to find the young mother. The family even offered an additional reward to the person who might find her remains. Her father, Jerry, made the following statement.
I think we might have to accept that her death might be a very real possibility at this time. As hard as it is to accept, the odds are she's dead, and our family is pretty well reconciled to not finding her alive.
Now remember, it's 1986 and DNA existed, but we didn't quite know how to use it in law enforcement yet. Plus, it was very, very expensive, and most agencies would not pay for it. We could tell if blood was human, and with a large enough sample, we could blood type it, but with a small sample, it was limited on what you could learn. No one was holding out a lot of hope for the small samples found at the scene, but soon the results were back.
Tests by the state crime laboratory showed the blood found at the apartment and in the car were human, but the samples were too small to determine the blood type.
You have to remember just how limited resources were. Literally, Detective Mayer was armed with cotton swabs, sterile water, and a plastic baggie.
If we only had a crime scene, then we could have really found some good stuff, I'm sure.
Now, little Leslie did say that she saw something. Detective Carol Kimball recalls.
We didn't do anything to traumatize that child, so with people who work with kids every day, let them build up a rapport and see if anything voluntary comes out of this child about what happened that night. She would say things like, somebody hurt mommy. She said something about 3 men in black with all black came in and hurt mommy, and mommy's feet were broken. And I do believe that we would have made some progress there, but Barry found out about it and he just had a fit. That was dead in the water.
Barry Harper put a stop to little Leslie talking to investigators. And time moved on with no solid leads. Cases like this just go cold unless they have a champion like Mel and Jerry Nixon. They were not about to let anyone forget about their daughter. Mel was quoted in the paper 6 months after Darla went missing, saying the family had no hope that she was still alive because she loved her family. Mel said when little Leslie asked about her mother, she told the girl that a very bad person had taken her mother, and if Darla could, she would come back to Leslie because she loved her daughter so very much.
Custody of the child was given to her father, Darla's ex-husband, Barry. Leslie's grandparents were awarded visitation.
Mel Nixon again was in the newspaper, hoping to hold the public's attention on the case. Mel said if they could bring Darla back and bury her next to her sister, that would help. Mel said Darla's case was something that she went to bed with, thinking about every night, and woke up with first thing every morning.
If anyone could find Darla, it would be Mel Nixon. She had a background in public relations, and she knew keeping her daughter's name in the press would be key to resolving the case. Detective Vince Mayer expected leads to come pouring in.
Once the media got a hold of it, normally you would get a lot of leads from it just getting out to the public. That wasn't this case.
This just wasn't a typical case.
1 year after her disappearance, the family held a memorial service for the young missing mother. The next month, a strange phone call provided a new lead for Detective Carl Beadle.
The Safeway Pharmacy in Sherwood received a telephone call from a person who said they were calling from a doctor's office and wanted to fill an order for Valium for Darla Harper. But the pharmacist noticed a discrepancy in the order and called the doctor. That's when he learned a doctor never ordered the prescription. Later that day, Deborah Partridge of 111 Shady Grove Lane in Sherwood went to the pharmacy to pick up the prescription for Darla Harper. The pharmacist told her the prescription wasn't ready and called the police. No charges are being filed against Partridge at this time, but the incident is being investigated.
Deborah Partridge had her own story to tell, and my, what a story it was. She told police she'd received a call that morning from a woman who said she was Darla Harper. Partridge says she didn't know Darla, but the woman on the phone said she was a member of Partridge's church and asked Partridge to do her a favor and pick up a prescription for her at the local pharmacy. This person, of course, never did call back. We tried to reach out to Deborah Partridge today while we were working on this podcast, but she's deceased. She apparently had struggled with addiction for many, many years.
While the police were investigating the disappearance, the court system was trying to figure out how to handle Harper's divorce. You see, right before her disappearance, Darla and Barry were in divorce court. Darla had filed for divorce from Barry more than a year before disappearing. Detective Carol Kimball recollects there were rumors of domestic abuse.
I remember them having a history of domestic abuse, but I do not remember if there was any documented reports of them ever having issues to where the sheriff's office was called out.
In fact, in the divorce filing, Darla said that her husband physically and verbally abused her in the 6 years they were married. But there were never any police calls, so there was not a police report filed that would have documented the abuse. The divorce was granted in November, a few months before she disappeared, and child custody was awarded to Darla. But no final divorce decree was entered because the two parties were still trying to settle some property division issues.
They didn't have a lot, but they had a house, pension funds from both jobs, and a nice savings account along with a life insurance policy if Darla were to die.
Darla's disappearance left everything in limbo. A month after her disappearance, Barry, her estranged husband, asked for a final divorce decree, and the judge refused to enter the divorce decree because of Harper's disappearance. He left it in limbo. However, he did award temporary custody of Leslie to Barry.
The issue was this. If the divorce was granted, Darla, or rather her estate, would receive her share of the couple's property. If it didn't go through and the court ruled that Darla was dead, then Barry Harper would inherit her share. Darla's attorney, Mac Norton, said he would request a rehearing, and he was willing to take the case to the state Supreme Court. Of course, anybody with any dealings with the legal system understands that time moves really slowly. So as time moved along, investigator Carl Beadle, well, he's still out there looking for clues, trying to figure out, did Barry kill Darla? Who killed Darla? Would they ever find her body?
You know, there's just so much involved in this case. And you can see 2 or 3 different scenarios that could have happened to Darla. But you'd be hard-pressed to prove any of them. I still work on the case 1 day out of every week. I'm still working on it. We get something new every now and again, and then we follow it up. We do have a report from someone who claims to be an eyewitness. There was a woman living in the same apartment complex who told us she saw 3 people messing with the door of Darla's apartment. The woman waited 5 months after the disappearance to tell the police. She said she repressed the memory out of fear.
Detective Kimball looks back on this witness.
I dealt more with her, I think, than probably anybody. Nobody else wanted to deal with her, and I would sit and listen to her.
It sure seemed like a promising clue, though.
The apartments are like an L shape, and Darla's in the long part of the L, and this witness was over in the other building, but she was upstairs to where she would have had a direct view of Darla's front door from her apartment.
The woman who lived at Darla's apartment complex underwent hypnosis by a local psychiatrist and described in vivid detail seeing Darla being beaten by 3 men who came into her apartment and tried to force her to perform in a pornographic video. One of the men had a scar on his face, according to the neighbor, and while under hypnosis, she described vividly seeing the men carry Darla out of the apartment and load her, unmoving and wrapped in a blanket, into her own car. But the witness, well, she also said those men, those same men, also had raped her and threatened to kill her 2 children if she told her husband or the authorities about the attacks. Detective Beadle didn't find the neighbor's story all that credible, but he chased down that lead.
The men that the woman identified had completed a painting job at the apartment complex that day. The brother of one of the men had been arrested in another state for distributing pornography, but the men were interviewed extensively and there was no evidence to link them to a crime. 2 years later, the woman began changing her story. She said she was forced to accompany the men to a rock quarry where Darla was killed and buried. The woman has since moved out of state and has been arrested there for reporting a false rape and is under the care of a psychiatrist.
Detective Carol Kimball looks back on the disappointment.
She would have been a good witness if she hadn't been like crazy. She made up a lot of stuff. She came up with the thing about, I woke up during the night and I looked out and I saw 3 guys dressed in black messing with Darla's front door, and just went on from there, and later says, well, by the way, they raped me too. It was later determined that she was not credible.
It certainly was, but it shows how Carl Beadle was tracking down all of these different leads, no matter how far-fetched or how crazy they might have been, because you guys never know, right?
This case was one that the investigator that was assigned to it, the principal investigator from the sheriff's office, Carl Beadle, he was a very professional, very quiet kind of guy, and I understand this case really weighed heavily on him.
Weighed on him and on the family. Darla's mother, Mel, was quoted in the paper saying she was the most frustrated person in the world, but she had no doubt that her daughter had been murdered. The quote that hit me the hardest was when Mel said her ability to enjoy life was lost forever. In the press from the time period, you can tell both the investigators and the family were frustrated with each other.
The sheriff's office was getting the hell beat out of them in the paper and by the family. And over the years, I've found that a lot of times families, they aren't satisfied with the job that the police are doing. And they think that the police should be doing a lot more than they are. And many times that's true, but other times it's just a nature of a case that goes cold. It goes cold, no matter how hard and how hot the investigators are that are working on it.
The family ended up hiring 8 different psychics, all of whom said Darla had been murdered, but none who produced a body. The Nixons were no closer to finding their daughter than they were years before, and that not knowing, that had to eat at them.
Over time, more information began to trickle out from the case. In 1989, a newspaper reporter added a few more bits to the story.
A half-written thank you note to someone who had sent flowers to the recent funeral of Darla Harper's older sister, Deborah Nixon, who had choked to death on February the 21st, was found on Darla's bed. Her shoes were beside the bed. An employee of the service station where the car was found told detectives that the car wasn't there at 9 p.m. on the day that Harper was discovered missing, but was there 3 hours later.
The family was frustrated, and the police were frustrated. Detective Beadle strongly felt Darla was dead. He just couldn't prove it.
I suspect foul play. I do, and so does the family. I've got more than 40 files on the case, but but there's just not enough information to solve it. I really wish we could get this case in front of a grand jury, because if they ask you a question, you've got to answer it. But the first step is to prove there's been a crime committed, and there's still a slight possibility that Darla ran away.
Carl Beadle was a quiet and determined man, but wasn't the only person who wondered why this case didn't go to the grand jury. Detective Carol Kimball says it should have.
I don't know why it never did go to the grand jury, because there were a lot of little things until you put them all in one bag, okay? And everything that I saw and knew about it pointed to Barry as the perpetrator.
Yet there were very clear signs that she didn't just walk away.
You know, that car had been wiped free of fingerprints except for 2 prints on the rearview mirror and 1 on the passenger door. Blood was found on the hatchback and on the driver's side door handle, and a little piece of rope was found inside.
Kimball remembers those fingerprints.
The fingerprints, they did those all manually. Barry got disqualified. That wasn't his fingerprint on the mirror or on the door, but I've always said that he had somebody else with him that night.
Yeah. If Darla was planning on running away from her life, I doubt she would have taken the time to wipe down her own car for her own fingerprints. That alone just doesn't make any sense.
Nope. Not much in this case makes sense even today.
You know, the fingerprints were never matched to any of the people interviewed. The crime lab was only able to determine that the blood may have belonged to someone with type B or AB blood. Harper and her daughter had type O blood.
No stone was left unturned, including Darla's sister's grave. In 1986, thinking that the killer might have hidden Darla's body in her sister's grave, the sheriff disinterred Deborah Nixon. Remember, she had died just 10 days before Darla went missing. Her cause of death was choking, a stupid accident.
That poor family. The sheriff also dug for Darla on a farm near Glendale, Arizona, and in several different quarries in the county. Nothing was ever found.
Still, new information was coming out. Remember the neighbor? Well, she did tell the police all she knew at the time of Darla's disappearance, and slowly the investigators released some of that information to the public, hoping to generate more leads. The newspaper reported.
The mystery includes a complicated divorce settlement pending at the time of Harper's disappearance, the presence of an allegedly jealous boyfriend, and the emergence 5 months later of a possible eyewitness to Harper's murder.
Oh, wait, a jealous boyfriend.
Love and money, sister, that's what causes a lot of people to go berserk, shooting, killing, you know. Darla's neighbor remembered a phone call that night.
See, I was visiting with Darla earlier in the evening when she got a phone call from a man she'd been seeing for several months. Darla had met the man while visiting her estranged husband, Barry Harper, at a substance abuse treatment facility in North Little Rock.
You know, rehab's never a good place to find a man. Darla's mother, Mel Nixon, well, she found some letters in Darla's apartment after Darla went missing. The letters implied that Darla had fallen in love with this man, but she realized she was making a mistake and was actively trying to end the relationship. Mel Nixon said the boyfriend was calling, and he was a bit controlling of Darla, wanting to know where she was if she didn't answer the phone right away. Darla told her friends she wanted to break up with this man, but she was afraid he'd go back to drugs.
Detective Kimball did not forget the boyfriend.
She was dating some guy, but they had just been seeing each other for a little while. We talked to him and just kind of disqualified him right off the bat. I mean, he didn't know motive, or he had an alibi too, and I can't remember what it was.
Kimball remembered talking to Barry about what he was doing the night his estranged wife went missing.
Barry's alibi for that night, the night she disappeared, we just rode around. We were just messing around, out riding around. I figure he's out trying to score drugs or doing drugs, but he was with somebody just riding around. And I do not remember who this person was that he was with, if it was a coworker, if it was his future wife, Yvonne.
Now, Barry Harper was quoted in the newspaper stating that he worked for Southwestern Bell Telephone as a repairman, and that the night Darla vanished, he had been driving around first with a coworker and then by himself until about 11 p.m. In fact, Barry just didn't seem too concerned about the mother of his child being missing. There's no evidence stating that Barry even went out with the search teams looking for Darla.
That's what's gnawed at Carol Kimball through the years.
what was he doing all night with somebody out riding around? Wondered if it was somebody that he worked with, if it was just a druggie friend. Did they look and see if he was out buying drugs at night? Because he later had a conviction of buying drugs in the McAlmont area, which is over there close to where Darla lived.
Neighbors placed Barry's car at his home no earlier than 4 a.m. So what was he doing between 11 and 4? And this is on the night she went missing. The police asked Barry Harper to take a lie detector test. Barry refused.
We talked to him. We brought him in. I was with Carl when we interviewed him for the first, second, and third time. But then he just shut down and sat down and says no. And he wouldn't take a polygraph. He wouldn't do anything. He never cooperated or got involved in the search for her or acted like he cared anyway. I mean, he didn't do anything.
Police followed up every lead and went through the list of possible suspects, crossing them off one by one, leaving only one really credible suspect, Barry. Detective Kimball thinks he had plenty of motive.
Motive, okay? They're in the middle of a divorce. They've been fighting, child custody, money issues. There's a $50,000 account, and there was also a life insurance that Barry had taken out on her through Southwestern Bell. It's over $100,000.
Detective Mayer agrees only Barry Harper had a motive.
She had a good job. She was a single mother raising a 2-year-old. No one else other than him had a motive.
Barry Harper moved on. He had custody of little Leslie, and she did have visitation with Darla's parents. Barry had remarried in the spring of 1989, but by the summer of that year, Barry's life was about to take another turn. And that turn, well, it wasn't a good one, and it involved the police. This concludes part 1 of this episode of The Coroner's Report, Darla Harper and Pam Page, When the Cousins Went Missing. Stick around, there's a lot more to this story. If you like our content, please remember to like and subscribe and let your friends know. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us anytime on our website at thecoronersreport.net or on any social media platform at The Coroner's Report. Special thanks to investigators Vince Mayer and Carol Kimball for sharing their memories. Thanks also to voice actors Savvy Valentine, Alan Prather, J.D. West, Sean Davis, and Chris Schaefer. Copyright 2024 Aussie Grove Media Group, LLC.